I'm excited to jump into our Teach Me journal. So if you're unfamiliar with this, last month we started a journey. Just invited anybody who wanted to into this journey. This is a Teach Me journal, and it's still available. You can start at any time. But literally, this is what it's based on, is this idea that Jesus asks us not just to learn, but to obey. And so even the Great Commission says this: I want you to go into all the world, make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded them. And this has just been resonating in my mind over the last couple of years. It's not just distributing information about what Jesus said, but actually equipping to obey, like to teach them to obey. And so we just identified 4 things that Jesus asks us to do. Abide in him. We talked about that last month. This month, the month of October, is rejoicing in him. And so I want to just take, at the beginning of the month, a little time to talk about what it means to rejoice. It's something that the Lord has asked us to do, and that's not always easy. I had a great experience. I promise not to be the guy who talks about their grandkids all the time. But this week, on Tuesday, I got 2 videos. So one of our grandkids lives across an ocean. The other one lives across a continent. And there's 2 little boys. One of them is about 20 months old, and the other is about 5.5 months old. And I was just sent these videos. Now, the first one was the 20-month-old grandson running circles in the living room in a diaper, just yelling and laughing and having so much fun for no apparent reason. And I watched this video and I'm just laughing. Then later in the day, I got a video of our second grandson, who he's just a little guy, almost 6 months old. And it was just mom just tickling him. And like this belly laugh, it was contagious. I'm watching and I'm laughing. When you just see a baby who's laughing, it's just like the deepest, most pure laugh. And as I watched those videos, I thought, wow, how is it that it's easy to lose that capacity to rejoice? But it happens. It happens. And Jesus really wanted us to be people who rejoice. So if you're spiritually unresolved, you're not sure what you believe, here's one thing that I'm deeply concerned about. I'm deeply concerned about this idea that we associate being solemn, maybe grave, incredibly serious with deep spirituality. That we put the 2 things together. That in order to be deeply spiritual, it also means that you kind of eliminate anything fun from your life and you smile less. I had this experience for, I think about 9 years. At the beginning of the year, I would take a week and I would visit a Benedictine monastery. And it was just a great place to pray, to study, to prepare my heart, my life for the coming year. But I'll tell you what, those guys were amazing. I learned a lot from them, but it wasn't a real fun place. It was very serious. And I think even in my own mind, I start thinking, oh yeah, deep spirituality means you're incredibly somber. And I don't think that's actually true. I think that deep spirituality should mean you're joyful and you have this renewed capacity to rejoice. So I want to read one passage of scripture from the book of Philippians where Paul really lays out this concept of rejoicing. And he gives us a pathway forward because it's not always easy. In our world today, we have heightened numbers of people. Every study will confirm this, dealing with anxiety, depression, all these painful things, and joy seems really, really elusive in our world. And I love that 2,000 years ago, Paul, this mental health expert in his own way, is going to give us a pathway towards rejoicing, and he links it with Jesus. So this passage we're about to read, Paul's going to he's going to use the word rejoice, and he's going to link all these other concepts with rejoicing. And they're things that we typically wouldn't link with it. I'm excited about pursuing this, and here's my hope. If you're a disciple of Jesus, I hope that you learn to rejoice and you have a breakthrough and there is a lightness that just permeates your life. If you're spiritually unresolved, I want you to see that God really wants you to rejoice. He really wants the best for you. So Philippians chapter 4, we'll begin at verse 4. It begins with this command: rejoice in the Lord when everything goes your way. when you just feel light, what does he say? Rejoice in the Lord always. And right there we think, man, this guy must have been out of touch. He doesn't realize how painful the world can be. He doesn't realize what I've been through. Here's what I want you to know about this. Paul writes this, and this man has scars all over his body because he has been arrested and he has been beaten, and people thought they killed him multiple times, but he still has joy. So Paul didn't have an easy life. He's not out of touch. He says there's a way to rejoice always, even in the midst of this difficult world. Rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again. Rejoice! Exclamation point. And now here's the first thing he's going to associate with this. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. So this phrase right here is really interesting. We often think about the return of God, that his timeline, it's near. But I think what Paul is saying there, linguistically, if you look at it, he's saying you can rejoice because of the proximity of the Lord. He hasn't left you. He's still here. So rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God. So in Greek, this is a rene. Hebrews uses the word shalom. This is the peace. Whose peace is it? It's God's peace, the peace of God, not a peace that you manufacture, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds. And again, he puts it back into this relationship. It will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. I want to take a few moments. I want to explore this concept of rejoicing. How do we get there? Number one, if you want to learn how to rejoice, I believe this is the first step, is you have to believe that God rejoices. You have to believe that God rejoices. So I don't know if it's because of art. I don't know if it's because of how we present God or how we interpret certain passages. But I think most of us develop in our minds a picture of a God who is not rejoicing, but instead who is stern and frustrated and on the verge of eliminating you at any moment. And he's got like a long beard and a somber look on his face. And he's just looking down at humanity like with a fly swatter, like who's acting? Boom! Like bad things, sickness, like ugh. And there's something in our minds when we think about deep spirituality, as I mentioned, or we even think about God and we think about somber and serious and frustrated, and joy is like, that's just not a part of the equation when we consider God. And I think we have to address this, otherwise we'll never be able to be joyful ourselves. Here's how the Bible begins. Genesis chapter 1. God begins to create this moment of artistic exposition and uniqueness. And here's what he says at the end of every day. It was good. I like that. And he says that 5 times. And on the sixth day, when he makes humanity, what does he say about humanity? It was very good. Very good. I understand that there's sin. I understand there's human rebellion. But fundamentally, you want to know this. When God made human beings, he said, they're very good. I'm pleased with them. The Old Testament is filled with celebrations that God weaves into the very fabric of their culture. If you work in HR today, sometimes you get a little frustrated because there's like all these holidays and new holidays are being added. You know that the Old Testament has a minimum of 7 different week-long festivals where you didn't work? Like, God's really into parties and good times. 7 times a year, like we all look forward to Christmas, and if you're fortunate, you get a day or 2 off. And God's economy, as he set up his culture, he goes, hey, let's just put in a party like every other month. a week where people get to pause and rejoice and be together and express their gratitude and focus back on me. God put in a system where he said every seventh day, let it be a day of rest and rejoicing. Let it be a day where you connect with your Creator. God is into rejoicing. G.K. Chesterton says this. In this passage beforehand, he's talking about children and their joy and this capacity that over time we begin to lose our capacity to rejoice. And G.K. Chesterton says this, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we are. That there's something about sin and pain and catastrophe in the world and sickness and heartbreak that creates an age in us that can begin to callous our hearts. And he says, our Father is younger than we are. Our Father wants to laugh and celebrate. There's a passage from Nehemiah that helps us, from Zephaniah, that helps us begin to understand that God himself rejoices. So this is one of the minor prophets in the Old Testament, and he's trying to call the people back into a joyful relationship with their Creator. In Zephaniah, we read this, the Lord your God is with you, the mighty warrior, that's a name for God, who saves. And he will take great delight in you. Before we move on, I want you to stop and I want you to personalize that. And you feel like I feel that there's all these qualifiers. Well, maybe if I dealt with this or I got rid of that part of my life, but there's so much shame. Listen, he takes great delight in you, just like you are. He looks at you and he says, that's my girl. That's my boy. And shame teaches us that there's no way God could feel that way about us, but he takes great delight in you. I have 4 kids and I am a failed, imperfect human father. But man, do I take delight in my kids. They're all grown up and doing their own thing right now. And I just think they're the best. I am completely and utterly biased. Some of you guys know my kids and you're like, yeah, they're not that great. And I'm like, no, they are, right? Because I love them. Your Father in heaven takes great delight in you. Zephaniah goes on. In his love, he will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing. Okay, wrap your mind around that for a moment. He rejoices over you with singing. Like it's a song that he would sing to you, that you're his, and he would sing over you how much he loves you, how expansive his love is. He'd sing over you like, don't let your shame cloud this, experience my love for you. Have you ever noticed that when an adult is with a little kid and you're trying to get that little kid to laugh or smile, like you'll do anything. You'll make the craziest faces and the goofiest sounds. Why? Just because you want to delight in this child. Your Father sings over you. Could you imagine that? Like he sings a song over you about how proud of you he is, about how much he loves you. If we want to be people who can rejoice, we have to reorient our thinking and believe that God himself rejoices. I just want to take you to one more passage that emphasizes this. This is from the book of John, chapter 15, where Jesus is giving, it's his final big discourse to his disciples before he goes to the cross. And one of the things he talks about is joy. John 15, we read this. I have told you this. So he's talked to them about the Spirit of God will be with them, that he won't be around forever, but doesn't mean that God's not engaged. I have told you this so that my joy Jesus had joy, right? Most of the pictures you see of Jesus, he's not necessarily joyful. We have images of him enduring the cross, and he looks agonized, right? He doesn't look joyful. But Jesus says this, here's what I want. I want my joy that it may be in you. Here's what Jesus wants for his disciples, to experience his joy. And that your joy may not be temporary or fleeting, but it may be complete. That there is a joy that Jesus wants to put in us, and he wants to complete our lives, our joy quotient, where we realize, hey, everything is going to be okay. I have a reason to celebrate. I have a reason to smile. I am not left alone. So the first step to learning how to rejoice is reorienting our minds and believing that God himself rejoices, that God is filled with joy, that Jesus wants to make my joy complete. That's one of his express goals, is to make your joy complete. Here's the second step. I believe that you have to train yourself to rejoice. I think as children, most children just rejoice automatically, right? But I think Chesterton was right, that we've sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we are. And what happens is over time, you start adding responsibilities and worry and some scars from living life. And you start worrying about what's happening politically and globally and what's happening in relationships in your neighborhood. And all this begins to build up in my life. And I really believe that I need to train myself to rejoice, because it is typically unnatural for us to do that. So how do you train yourself to rejoice? I think if you want to train yourself to do anything, it's a process and it takes time. Some years ago, there was a guy from church here, and I was regularly working out with him, and he was super disappointed in me that I couldn't do handstand push-ups. And I'm like, dude, this body was not made for a lot of handstand push-ups. He's like, no, you can do this, you can do this. And so, the first couple times, so you're standing on your hands, I put my feet against the wall, and it was like, come crashing down, like, I'm gonna put my head through the floor. This is not good. He's like, you can do this. And for 5 months, he worked with me on handstand push-ups. Naturally, I couldn't do one. But at the end of 5 months, I could rip out 7 of them. Didn't look good. The floor was still terrified every time I was lowering myself. But if you train yourself, it's amazing. You can make progress. And Paul, I think, as he's writing to his friends in the city of Philippi, he's saying, I want you to begin to train yourself to rejoice. You're going to have to make some concerted steps. You just don't stumble into joy. You don't stumble into rejoicing. And joy isn't just about this alignment of all the circumstances in my life have gone right, and now I can be joyful. Forgive me, this is about the best I can think in terms of illustrating this. I think if you and I have 2 major influences in our lives, and culturally, here's what we're taught about joy. We're taught about joy this, that the circumstances of my life and my experiences will determine my level of joy. So if I get a promotion, if I get a raise, if I have harmonious relationships with other people, if people value me and respect me, if whatever it is, if everything goes well, then I experience joy. However, the inverse of that is what? Well, if things go badly, if I lose my job, if I don't feel respected, if my relationships are chaotic, then I've lost my joy, right? Here's the problem with circumstances and experiences. They're variable. They are variable. You could have an extraordinary month where everything went well, and so then you're joyful, followed by an extraordinarily painful month. And when my level of joy is tied to my experiences and circumstances, I will have this up, down, joyful life. I'll fall into deep sorrow and depression. And so there are all these things culturally that point us towards this. is that if you have this, if you achieve this, then it'll bring you happiness. Here's what Paul wants to tell the people in Philippi and what he would want to tell us today. He would say, what if we begin to focus on God? And remember, he keeps saying that joy is in Christ Jesus. And I look to God because here's what God is. He's constant. He's constant. Hebrew. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Hebrews 13:8. And if I look to God for joy, this is unchanging. I could be employed or unemployed, and that has absolutely no bearing on the fact that I am forgiven in Jesus, that I am accepted, that I am loved, that I am called a daughter or a son of God, that I have this deep sense of security regarding eternity, because none of that ever changes. It is constant. God is constant. Everything else in life is variable. And here's what we typically do. We begin to link our joy with our circumstances and our experiences. And this becomes bigger and bigger. Whether it's because it's been painful and ugly, it becomes dominant. Or it's beautiful, it becomes even bigger. And we look here for joy. Listen, I'm not knocking you. Like, we all do this. Walt Disney has been teaching you to do this from the time you were a tiny little baby. It's like it's about the right prince, and it's about the right kiss at the right time. And it's just like this is what will make me happy. And here's what the Bible argues. The Bible says, actually, like, you can't count on any of this. In fact, what if you found your joy in God, who is unchanging, and then when things were bad, you're like, ooh, that's bad. However, God still loves me. I'm looking for a job. I feel betrayed. I don't feel good. My body is in a horrific position. All of that is true, but nothing has changed about God. He is there. He loves you. He's on your side. He delights in you. He rejoices over you with singing. And so if I can tie my sense of joy to God and not to circumstances, it changes everything. That's how you train yourself to be joyful, is you begin to walk through life, and when things don't go well, you're like, that didn't go well. That hurts. Ouch. I'm not talking about living in denial. You fully acknowledge that was painful. You acknowledge it, and you say this, and God still loves me. And I am still forgiven. And I am still his child. Regardless of what happens in the variable aspects of life, my position with God is unchanging. This is how Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. Always. Whether it was a great month or a terrible month, whether the fiscal year was a catastrophe or a success, whether my marriage is happy and my relationships are happy or it is torturous. Paul says, it's okay. That's a reality. But it doesn't mean you can't rejoice. Because through it all, God has been consistent. And that is one part of your life that doesn't change. So I train myself to look towards God. And I find my sense of happiness in him. Here's the third thing. Remind yourself that there is a difference between what we feel and what we know. What we feel and what we know. So the challenge with this elicits big feelings in me, right? And some of us are wired differently. I've been told that my feelings are a little bit like flatlined by somebody who's known me in a marital relationship for 32 years. So some of us, like, we feel big, right? Or we don't feel a lot. But I have to remind myself that this is what I feel. And this is what I know. And when I know this can't impact me as much. So I think here's the thing with emotions. We don't want to rule them out. I actually think they're God-given. They're part of being made in the image of God. But we can't let our emotions rule us. Truth rules us. This is what I know. I acknowledge the pain. So, because this gets into really difficult positions. Like one of the things we have around here is grief share. And like, grief share, everybody there has lost somebody. And like, okay, anybody who's in grief share right now and you're reading Paul and Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. And you're like, how insensitive. I get it. But here's what Paul would say. That is a very real thing. And you need to walk through grief and you need to process grief. But in the midst of it, you have to know that God is unchanging and that he loves you and he forgives you. So learn to distinguish between what we feel and what we know. Here's a fourth thing. Paul says, I want you to think daily distribution. Daily distribution. So this is not a one-time deal, all right? I don't just train myself, okay, I got this. I did a week of learning to rejoice, thinking about God, thinking about the permanent things in life. This is a day. This might be an hourly thing for us. And so Paul then presents this whole idea of anxiety, right? Which is rampant in our society. There's so much that can make us anxious. What kids are doing, what is happening in the political realm, what's happening in my neighborhood, what's happening globally. I mean, we woke up yesterday morning to another conflict in the world. I mean, all of this creates deep anxiety in us. And here's what Paul says. If you want to learn how to have a life of rejoicing, I want you to think daily distribution. Do not be anxious about anything. But in everything, with prayer and petition and thanksgiving, I want you to present your anxiety, your requests to God. So, do you remember, like some years ago, our government did a program, it was called Cash for Clunkers. Remember that? And like, I was super excited because at the time I was driving a 1996 Mitsubishi Montero with 279,000 miles on it. Blue Book value was like $850. And the government guaranteed that they would give you, I think it was $5,000 to cash in your clunker. And I'm like, this is awesome, right? So I drove my smoking, belching Mitsubishi Montero down there, and apparently not every clunker qualified because they offered me $500. And I'm like, where's the extra zero, right? This is cash for clunkers. They don't want my clunker. Here's the trade-in that God offers. Give me your anxiety. Do not be anxious about anything. But in everything, prayer and petition with thanksgiving, I want you to present that anxiety to me. God is inviting human beings to bring those things. Here's what we typically do. We internalize. We obsess. We think, how do we fix this? So you can be talking about things within your family dynamics or things within your community, political, global, whatever it might be. All these things that create anxiety in our lives, we hold on to them and they're within us, and anxiety just rots at your soul. And most of the time, there's very little I can do about any of it, but I get mad and I get frustrated. And here's what Paul says. If you want to learn how to rejoice, you have to learn about daily distribution. Is that you take your anxiety and you present it to God. I take those things that terrify me, that keep me up at night, those things I obsess about in the business world, the political world, in my relationships, and I present them to God through my prayers, petitions, and thanksgiving. Why in the world would God offer to take those things? But he does. This is a pathway to living a life where you can rejoice, is giving God all the things that create the deepest anxiety within your soul. And the distribution doesn't end there. I distribute that. And that might not be every day, every week. It might be every hour. It might be at the end of a meeting that has created all kinds of anxiety in your heart as you are walking back to your desk from the conference room, or you're walking back to your truck from the job site, as you're saying, that meeting has created anxiety, and here's what I do. God, I am giving that to you. Here it is. Here's my uncertainties. Here's my insecurities that elicited within my soul. I am handing that to you. And then what does God do in return? When you present your anxieties to him, he says, and the peace of Christ, which transcends understanding, will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. I give him my anxiety, and what does he give you in return? He gives me the peace of Christ, this eirene, and it's Jesus's. He won it on the cross. As I hand off my anxiety, I am giving something in return that is much better. It's the peace of Christ, and it transcends understanding. Meaning, maybe nothing changes in my circumstances and experiences. It's still a tough situation. But I just gave him my anxieties. I just prayed. I just said, God, this is yours. I can't do anything about this. And you suddenly, inexplicably, experience the peace of Christ. And people go, well, aren't you really concerned about that? Like, nah. Why not? Well, I've got something guarding my heart. I've got something guarding my mind. And it's the peace of Christ. And it won't make any sense to anybody else because this is miraculous. But this is what a disciple of Jesus is able to experience. It's like, oh yeah, you're not immune to anxiety, but there is something to do with anxiety. It's when I'm anxious, I give that to God. I pray at a moment's notice. When I feel my pulse rate going up, my blood pressure, like, okay, it's time for me to give something to God. I'm going to stop and I'm going to pray. And I'm going to receive from him the peace of Christ. And it's going to guard my heart. It's going to guard my mind. Doesn't mean I don't go through hard things. But I go through hard things with a supernatural gift from God. His peace. His peace. So think daily distribution. I am distributing my anxiety and fears to him. He is distributing his peace within me. And I live life guarded. My mind and my heart guarded by the peace of Jesus. And then lastly, just in summation, as we think about this world of rejoicing, instead of pursuing joy, pursue God. Instead of pursuing joy, pursue God. So we have had so many things enforce this concept to us that what you want to do is in life is you pursue favorable circumstances and experiences because this is where you find joy. And so you have to do what's right for you. Well, you deserve to be happy. I mean, these are phrases which are partially true, right? And so if you're not careful, here's what you do. You think joy, rejoicing is just on the other side of one more achievement or one more acquisition. That if I pursue joy, so I think if I just had a newer car, a bigger house, a better spouse, different friends, if I just had another promotion, whatever it is, we think we pursue joy. You're taught to do that. I am taught to do that. You pursue joy, but here's the problem. You finally achieve that thing you've been looking for, and it satisfies you for 3 weeks. And you realize, I need something more. I like joy's it's always just out of reach. And you have been taught to live that way. I've been taught to live that way. If there's just one final thing I would say about rejoicing, is Paul's saying this: pursue God. Don't pursue joy. Pursue God. And when you pursue God, when I choose to live as a disciple and I surrender to his commands and I choose to obey him, even if obeying him doesn't lead to immediate gratification. Sometimes obeying him, carrying out his commands, living the way he asked me to, it's sacrifice. It's the opposite of what I want to do internally. When you learn to pursue God, joy comes. Joy comes in knowing that he knows what's best for me. Joy comes as I say, Jesus, I want the joy that you talked to your first disciples about. That my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. When I pursue a relationship with Jesus, I can find complete joy, regardless of my circumstances.